Welcome to session number 8 of the Horizon Knowledge series called Right Sizing Your Workplace. I know a lot of people are looking at downsizing or redoing their office space, getting a hybrid work up to date, getting visitor management solutions set up. So Sean's going to give you a nice walkthrough of all this today. Look through Archibus to talk about potential add-ons, some integrations options as well. And you have some housekeeping items. Sessions should be up to date on the YouTube. Everything's uploaded. We also have our first Horizon user group that is recording that's been uploaded as well. That's all ready to go on the YouTube as well. And our second invite will be going out in the next couple of days. If you want to keep an eye out for that, come bring your experiences, bring your Archibus stories, and it's sure to be a good time. We've had some good discussion last time, so we find it really valuable. So other than that, I will give the floor to you, Sean, and you can get things going.
Okay, thanks, Ian. Hi, everybody. So today we're going to be talking about right-sizing your workplace in Archibus. As is usual, Ian is the host of this meeting, and I'll be presenting. My name is Sean Benson. This is our 8th of 10 series on right-sizing your workplace. We've covered a lot of topics related to asset management and asset services, BIM, and those types of things. And now we're kind of moving away from assets into more space-related, occupancy-related kind of issues. And we'll be talking about in the future real property costs and also KPIs and reporting that you can do. So today, as usual, we're going to start this little knowledge series with just a quick discussion of the opportunity that's available with right-sizing your space, and then a very quick run through of the steps that you need to take to get Archibus to match any kind of requirements that you have around space. So having said that, I think everybody's fairly familiar when we talk to an Archibus audience about the benefits of space management and the opportunity of space management. Nowadays, one of the main benefits, of course, and historically, of course, has been to reduce your footprint. And I'm not saying whether this is your building footprint, your financial footprint, or your carbon footprint. It's all kind of related. You can reduce, of course, your footprint if you can reduce and right size your space. So that's one opportunity, and that has an impact on what they call the triple bottom line typically, which is a good thing. You can also, in theory, increase your productivity, because what you're doing by changing your space and workspace and getting it in the right for the right type of space for your employees is increasing their productivity. You make them more productive by creating spaces that are suitable for them and their lifestyles and for working together, and that will also increase their satisfaction, and people will enjoy coming to work, and it kind of feeds back into each other, all these different benefits that you're getting. Now, if you're working in Canada, which many of you are, I think the other opportunity will be described in another way by PSBC. So you'll see, for example, opportunities like the flexibility, going green, making it efficient. I've stolen this slide, obviously, from the GC Workplace. So these, of course, are a different way of saying the same type of thing. But what does right-sizing your space mean? Well, nowadays, obviously, after COVID, I think, and for other reasons, just because technology now allows it, because transportation has gotten better, it means that we are all working in a different way. It means that we are implementing flexible working, meaning people are working from home, they're working from office, they're working from Starbucks or Tim Hortons, whatever it might be. You also configure space not just for a person to sit at their desk all day long. That's not even healthy. You configure your space for activity-based working, which means you need a space for having a meeting, you need a space to collaborate, you need space to work. So you might not be stuck in one seat all day. You might be moving around your office depending on the activity that you're doing. Also nowadays, again, technology makes this possible, but a lot of companies now are focusing on workspace experience and being able to provide employees with a self-service kind of a portal so they can access and they can manage the space themselves by selecting where they want to work or selecting how they want to work in a particular organization. Now, on top of that, you have, again, more technology that's providing the abilities to kind of keep your space up to date and identify how to make sure you've got the right space. And that is by taking advantage of IoT devices, badge readers, all sorts of information now is digital. So the systems can capture that information and use that as well to determine, to monitor exactly how much the space is being used. It doesn't mean that people are monitoring what you're doing and where you're moving and when you're going to the bathroom, whatever you might think it's doing. It just means capturing information to really identify how much space the organization is paying for and whether it's really being used the way that is intended or not. And of course, as you're doing all of this, you have to review and repeat and analyze as well. As I tell a lot of my customers, even if you do all of these things, even if you create a self-service portal, even if you have employees self-report where they're sitting, or you integrate with IoT devices, still it doesn't take away from the fact that physically we often have to do a space survey at least once a year or something like that, just to make sure everything is fitted and right sized properly. So you don't get away from manual processes. It's just you have additional tools now, and when you're using 4 or 5 tools, that's going to help you make sure that you've got the right space for the organization. Now, it doesn't matter what standard you use or what requirements you're trying to meet, whether it's the GC Workplace Design standards, whether it's your British Standards Association 15221, whether it's BOMA 2024 or the GSA for US government agencies. Whatever that governance is, Archibus generally has a very flexible system and way to manage your space and accommodate some of the things you're looking to do. Now, nowadays, I've worked with a lot of customers since COVID, and it seems like every customer has one thing that they do that no one else does and no one thought about. So there are some things that there are some limitations, of course, to any software that you get. But when you look at a system like Archibus, which has applications for managing an inventory, for identifying personnel, for allowing personnel to create requests for moves or for office changes, for space changes, for to reserve their own meeting rooms and to reserve their own workspaces, and then to plan in the future, then you have a lot of kind of capability within the system. And I've just read out some of the capabilities of the applications that you see here on the screen. And in addition to that, these applications have some kind of add-on features, like you have mobile apps for space and occupancy survey. So for those of you who do want to take a regular physical survey, you can go out into the building with your mobile app and update the information about where people are sitting and so on. There's a feature, it's a free feature available with the Space Console or with the occupancy application called Team Space, which allows you to break down your organization into smaller physical areas that different groups from an organization will kind of occupy during the day. And you don't have to manage those, by seat. You simply say, this is the group kind of area that this department's going to use. These are the employees that are part of that group. And these employees will come in and work whatever day they work in the office, and the rest of the time they can kind of manage the space themselves. So that's another feature that's available. It's a free one, and if you aren't using it and it looks like something you could use, turn it on and play with it. It's great. The workplace application now is an app as well as a portal on a browser that allows users to book their own meeting spaces, to request moves, to request other space-related services. So that's something I recommend. And of course, Archibus has a series of IoT examples built into the product, which you can use as examples for whatever integration, whatever devices that you have. And I'll show you a couple of screenshots in just in a minute. And the result of using all of these things together is that you can accommodate a lot of what you're trying to do now post-COVID. So for example, we do have a self-service portal, and we do have a capability for utilization and reporting of a variety of different types of space. And on the screen here, I've got a couple reports, for example, the space access analysis. Many of you may not have seen it, but it's because it's not a part of the application. It is a template that's used for integrating with IoT devices. So if you have a badge reader, for example, as people move in around the building, you can keep track of what floors people are on, what seats are, how many seats you have available, how many seats are currently assigned, what's the daily utilization, what's the peak utilization, and so on. And, and excuse me, within the actual Space Console, which many of you are already using, there are some reports or features that you're probably not aware of. For example, on the right-hand side of the screen here, we have a view of the Teams highlighting, where you can assign or break out parts of a floor and assign them to different employees and teams that will be using that part of the floor, that piece of the floor. It's a separate function than the standard Archibus organizational or space categorization, and it allows you to combine these into one kind of screen and then limit what people can use or book based on those locations or teams. On the left-hand side of the screen is a new, some of you may or may not have it, but in the Space Console, there is a new button which allows you to open up this workplace utilization report where it breaks down different types of spaces, reservable rooms for conference spaces, bookable workstations, or assigned space, and then report on and look at what spaces have been booked, what's booked and occupied, what's employee occupied, what's reserved, and so on. And there are features in the reservations application and the booking application, not only for making the booking, but also for checking into the booking to make sure that the people have actually used the space that they've reserved. So there's a lot of different functionality. And what we're going to do today is just walk through the steps that you need to go through to get this stuff up and running and working. And you'll find it's not that complicated, but of course, as usual, you know, the hard part about implementing this type of a system is deciding what you want to do, deciding the best way to roll it out, discussing with your employees how to do it, and change management, you know, getting people to adopt the system. Using Archibus is not that complicated. So let's just very quickly run through some of these steps. First, the thing you have to do is get your inventory of space involved. And this can take, you know, new customers a little while. But if you've already got this in place, which many existing Archibus users will, you've already done all of the things that you see on the screen. We can skip it to the part 2 and look at those other steps. But step 1 is to get your space and occupant inventory in place. It means defining core facilities and organizational data. That's something you do at the beginning of your implementation, and it should already be done at this point. But it means identifying the buildings and floors across your portfolio, including non-buildings, remote buildings, which might mean people who work from home. You might want to create a building called remote and assign people who work from home that building. It means creating divisions and departments in the system that you can allocate responsibility of the space for. It means creating the types of space that you're looking for, you know, whether it's the standard vertical service circulation and support areas, or if it's the functional areas like you have in GC Workplace for assigned spaces, bookable spaces, collaboration space, open plan areas that are available for anyone at any time. You might also have a separate classification, maybe for reporting for universities, or maybe reporting for GC Workplace, whatever it might be. We also have something called room standards in Archibus, which comply with design standards. So if you want to identify a space not only as a bookable or collaborative space, but as a workstation or a work pod or a focus room, room standards are very good for that as well, and you can keep track of both for a single room. Then, of course, once you have all this background, you can place your rooms. You can identify the rooms. You can identify the signage for the rooms, the capacity of an individual area, the current status of the space. You know, is it available? Is it under construction? And once you've done that, of course, you need to make sure that your employees are in place. Now, for a lot of these things, you don't necessarily have to have employees, but if you really are interested in occupancy, and if you're interested in letting employees, you know, open up and request services themselves, you want to have an employee in the system. You want to assign them to a default building. You want to have their phone number in place if you need to contact them, and things like that. So that's kind of part 1. Part 2 is, now that you've got your system in place, you need to kind of manage it. You need to open it up and let people use it, and then manage the utilization of the space, meaning that if you have space that's assignable, but it's fairly flexible for different teams, you have to create those teams, and then you have to assign the rooms and employee combinations that make up a team, or what I would refer to as a neighborhood. You need to identify which spaces are hotelable, meaning bookable by employees. What meeting rooms or collaborative spaces are going to be reservable and available to the employee through their self-service portal. There are also some parameters in Archibus. So each of these applications, what we call reservations and hoteling, these applications work in different ways based on parameters that you choose. So you should have to look at some of those parameters to decide, for example, if you want to make a space approved or unapproved, and so on. Some of your reservable arrangements will have different capacities than the meeting space itself if it were used for occupancy. Then you need to implement a move process. Move management's a great application. You don't have to do anything to configure the data. You don't have to add data. You just have to create a business process around it. You have to give people access to it. You have to set up a business process where you're going to, on a regular basis, collect those move requests and then execute the jobs and so on. So implementing a move process for assignable spaces is another step to take. And then, of course, get that employee portal out in front of people. So you enable the workspace application, you give workspace to different users so that your standard employee or staff member who normally wouldn't touch Archibus other than to make a request for maintenance, they can now access the space system and the tools for making reservations for conference rooms or workspaces and so on. And lastly, one of the things I like to propose to my clients who are using Archibus is, why not add additional services? You know, if you need to add an office space, or you need to convert a single office into 2 workstations, or you need to add you have 5 new employees being brought on next year, and you need to find available spaces, get those in as services in the system so you can track those requests and then implement them in the future, rather than waiting until the last minute and waiting for HR to let you know, oh, this is going to come through next month. So for me, adding these space services and having SLAs which are governing your own processes, this is also another benefit to the system, and helps you manage and plan for your space. Okay, so these are again, we've got 9 management steps, and we have 5 kind of one-time setup steps that you'll have to update as needed. Let's go through them now in the product. So I'm going to hop into Archibus here and log into the latest version of 2000, or it's now an old version, but it's 2023, this last quarter. And we'll start with the setup. You know, the first step is, of course, in Archibus, you have to have buildings and floors. Most of you probably already do this, but again, in the space management application under inventory, we have some background data. You click on your location tool, and you go to the building tab, and you can create and make sure that you have buildings set up. Click on add a building code, whatever that building is, building name, of course, and you have your kind of 10 main or whatever you want to call this particular building. I always tell people to add the address as well, because that's going to show up in most places. And then you can, of course, geocode the building as well. So if you want to locate that building, give it a latitude and longitude. Everything you do now in that building will be able to show up on a map. So that's just going to give you some more information related to your buildings. Once you get the building in the system, of course, you'll take that building and you'll create some floors. So you'll add a floor code 01, first floor, and so on, and then save your floor, and you're ready to go. So now you've got a building, a floor, and you're ready to actually identify the space on that floor and work with it. So you might get the rooms from AutoCAD, they might come from BIM. We've talked about that previously. You're going to start developing these rooms as you go. Now, if you don't have those other tools, you can start automatically adding the rooms here, but we'll talk about that in just a minute. So the core background is get those buildings and floors in, and then make sure you can assign some responsibility to an organizational group, which means you also have to have your organizations in the system. So for example, in Archibus, we'll typically add something called a business unit, which is your parent org. Again, you give it a code and a name, and then you add your additional breakdowns of divisions. This is usually what I would call a reporting group. So I'm going to call that recording group 1. This is a breakdown of how you want to see reports in the system by space or something else. And then of course you get your individual groups. So all of your lowest level groups in the organization. So that will accommodate, the 12 or 13 multiple layers that you might have at your organization. So those, again, that's step 1. That's core background data. It should be done as part of the initial implementation. It should only change when your organizational structure changes or your physical boundaries change within the floor. Okay. Step 2 is make sure that your classifications sorted out. So that's room categories and types, and of course room standards. So again, we go into the space application. This time we click on room inventory. We define room categories and types, and then we add our categories, and then the type will be the breakdown of individual categories. So category again will be, you identify what you want. It might be a collaboration area. You give it a name. These three fields are important for Archibus. One, you have to choose whether this type of space is a occupiable space, yes or no. Occupiable means that you'll be able to put people in that space. If you say no, you're talking about a hallway, a kitchen, a service area, elevator, whatever it might be. I have had people tell me they have bosses that work in the elevator so they can go up and down the floors to make sure everybody's working, but that's generally not the case in most buildings. So, collaboration areas, for example, would be, can be occupiable. In Archibus, you have your choice of whether you want to make a meeting space occupiable or not, depending on if you want this to show up in that report. But generally speaking, you fill out this form. Then you have the choice of whether you want that space to be included in your building totals or not. Most of the time when you're talking about space inside a building, it's going to be always included in your calculations, in the Archibus calculations that take place day to day. However, if we're talking about space outside of a building or on top of the building, like on the roof or in a parking garage or just in a parking lot that you're tracking, these would all be not included in building calculations of occupancy and rentable and usable area and so on. So generally speaking, this is set to all totals except for those external areas. And then lastly, of course, Archibus generates a few reports and calculations based on rentable space versus usable space, and therefore certain areas have to be identified as either vertical penetration, service area, usable, or other. Most of what we're talking about today when it talks about right sizing space is we're talking about the usable area. So when we're talking about collaboration space, open plan, workstations, support areas, primary desks, these are all usable spaces that we're going to be including. So you set those up. If you want to make them reservable, you make these usable and you set occupiable to yes, okay? Once you set up that collaboration area, you can, if you want, this is kind of optional in Archibus, but if you need additional types of space, for example, collaborative spaces, you might have a, bookable collaboration area, and you might have a non-bookable area, right? It might be assignable area. It might be an assigned area. So it's totally up to you how you kind of use that breakdown of type in Archibus. But the key thing to remember about this room category and type classification is this in the Archibus is used for functional use. How does the room function? It's not necessarily describing the construction or the design intent of the room. So that's where the room standard comes in. If this room category does not cover all of the reporting that you need, and you need a multi-dimensional reporting, then it also makes sense to set up room standards. So for example, if you have different types of collaboration area that you might apply to a specific area, you might have a standard called collab study room, or let's do this here, study area. And that's going to have a standard width, standard height, a highlighting pattern, maybe a standard description, and so on. You can even identify the cost of those spaces. So if you know a work pod or a focus room has a specific construction cost or cost of move, then you can assign that here, and that will help you again do some reporting on potential move costs. So room standards is, again, an optional feature in Archibus. It's optional on the space console. You have to actually consciously turn it on to see the reporting by room standard, but it is useful when you're looking at things like GC Workplace design standards versus technical standards and so on. So keep that in mind. That was step 2. Step 3, that was step 2 and 3, define room categories and room standards. Step 4 is once you have all that background, then you can go in and actually modify the space itself, which is in Archibus are rooms. So we'll be going into as a in background data, for example, you might use that define location screen to update rooms, or at this point, you will have brought in your AutoCAD floors or your BIM floors. You would have populated the rooms, and now you're ready to go in and modify individual information about each individual floor. So if I go to, for example, this NCO5 building, we can now see all of the area of the rooms, the number of rooms on the floor, and we can look at individual room detail here on the screen. Now this is where you want to go in and make sure that some of these details are all filled in, right? Each room should have signage identified so that when the customer is searching for a room to book, they can search on the sign name that's outside the room. That might be different than Archibus's code. So you'll need to make sure that the room name field is filled out. If you're keeping track of the standards and categories, you make sure those are filled out. But really important is making sure you have a capacity, because the capacity of the room, the number of seats that are available in that space, is what's going to give you an overall idea for a total capacity of the building and ultimately your utilization rate when you get employees assigned. So you do that. Also here you can identify area if you need. There are other fields like room use, and you can also identify whether or not the room is assigned directly responsibility to a single department like facilities or real property, or if it's going to be shared by multiple rooms on the floor. So this prorate field allows that. Take a look at the is hotelable field. This can be turned on if you want to use the workplace application for booking spaces. So if you want to make a room available to book, that should be set to yes. And I'm going to show you a different way to do that in just a minute. Also, you make sure that the status of your rooms is set here to available or do not use. So this is key. And then in addition to that, you want to make sure your employee data is up to date. So again, by default, most of the time your employee data is not getting updated by you individually, right? The HR system will be integrated with Archibus. HR information will be imported into Archibus, I hope on a daily basis, if not a weekly basis. And when it comes in, what it should include is a email address, a work phone number, and usually the division and department. That would be kind of some of the standard information. But you may need to identify a default building for each employee. Like I said, in Archibus, it is good to have an employee, even if they're not assigned to a seat, it's good to at least assign the employee to a building and to a ground floor or to a single floor in a building that they probably will use most of the time, or even to a remote building. Because what that does is it makes it less steps later on when the employee goes to book a space or book a room. If you've got them assigned to a building and floor, the system automatically pushes the floor in front of them and asks them to book a space on that floor, which they've been assigned to. And so they can kind of have a standard way or consistent way of interfacing with the system. And then of course, is other information that you may need to fill out about that employee based on their working habits. How many days in the office do they spend? What kind of return to working for do they have? Are they always remote? And so on. So that's the kind of information that you would update on the new employees after they've been imported from the HR system, typically. Okay, so that is the 5 steps that you need to have in place to start managing and right-sizing your workplace, right? This is the basic core data. After that, we've got 9 more steps that you can choose which you want to use or which you want to implement and how quickly. So again, I'm going to have to move through these quickly, but basically one of those things is to define teams for your space. So there is now an option on the console, for example, to access the teams. When you see that option, I think I need to shrink my screen here. There it is. So way over on the right-hand side of the console, there's a little option here which says show standards and show teams. If you want to use teams, you can save that console option. And the next time you go to the employee tab, teams will appear, and suddenly you have access to editing team data. And teams can be whatever you want them to be. You create a team just by clicking add team, give it a name, team red, team blue, team whatever you want to call it on the floor. You set a target ratio for the number of people that you want assigned to a desk from a team. You make it active, you save it. And then basically what a team becomes is a combination of a neighborhood of desks with a with a group of people. So for each team, you go in and you add individuals that are going to be part of that team, and they can be part of multiple teams. So these can be kind of cross-functional teams as well. And again, you can use teams to limit where people can book if they're going to use the combination of teams and the booking system. So that's kind of a nice feature. Same thing for the rooms. You can book multiple rooms. You can book teams by department. You can just check off the whole selection that you've added. So if I want to add a team to this particular floor and make all those rooms available, I can just check off all those, add those selected rooms to the team. And now I'm creating a mini version of a utilization for each available space in the system. And that's the basics of the team. Once you added that stuff, you can go back to your console and you can actually start managing some of this area by team. And you can click on the team and you can highlight by teams to identify what kinds of spaces are team spaces, who's using what, and the system will tell you what ratio of your target are you hitting. Are you at 94%? Are you at 79%? Do you need to add more people? Do you need to take desks away from the team to hit that ratio? That's how you manage that utilization of space here in the team application. So that's a nice feature. Second is you might want to make, as we said, some of these workstations now hotelable. Hotelable meaning an employee can book them through the workplace application to create to book their space that they want. So under workplace services, under hoteling, if you don't make the rooms hotelable, directly from the space console, there is a ability to go in and make rooms hotelable. So it's called define hotelable rooms. There's a whole page here. If you've set up your space, in a consistent way, you can go in and find your, I'm going to find my NC building. Sorry, I've got that in there. NC05, I think is the one I'm looking for. I'll just go in and show that. And then what I can do is for that building, go down to each floor. I highlight the hotelable rooms or whatever it might be. It's probably workstations in this database. Workstation, there we go. Select the workstations that follow into that kind of category and make them hotelable. Okay, I can also set the room status to be available. Now those rooms are available in the self-service portal. Similarly, you can make collaborative spaces reservable for meeting room reservations. So for that, you can go back to the workplace services menu, go to the reservation application, and go into, again, your background data and define reservable rooms. This screen works the same way. You find the rooms that are basically collaborative spaces, collab, you press show. Now I didn't create any because I just made that whole category, but let's go ahead and choose meeting space. You should show meeting spaces. Again, you can filter on a building or something, but we'll just go ahead and say, I want all my meeting spaces to be identified as reservable currently. Okay, that means that opens up those spaces and makes them available to the reservation application. Okay, it also generates a whole series of arrangements for those. So the next thing you would do is go in and make sure that every arrangement that's been generated, arrangement being the configuration of the conference room into theater, classroom, etc. It means that each arrangement also is set up. So again, there's a lot to this screen, so we can't go through it all today, but basically each arrangement then, for whether it is a conference space, a theater space, classroom, each arrangement will have its own kind of reservation requirements, its maximum days ahead, its the availability for a certain group within the organization, the maximum capacity allowed, the minimum required to make it, whether the room requires approval. All of this can be configured or left exactly the way as the defaults have set. you save those, and then your rooms are available for reservations. So this is all set up already. The only thing you want to do at this point is, if you're going to turn on these applications and make a self-service portal, it may make sense to go in and look at some of the application parameters for those two applications. I'm jumping into the system application, but you can find these parameters in both hoteling and reservations. And if you go into hoteling here, you'll see there's a series of parameters that identify how reservations get approved. Do you want to enforce a floor capacity? Are there full day bookings only? Do you require a health check? Do you want to restrict space based on floor or team? All of these things can be done with the hoteling, and they have similar reservations parameters as well. What time do the buildings start? What's the external booking email for domains? How many days before archiving do we wait? There's a variety of different parameters you want to set up. So that's number 4 and 5 in terms of our steps. Step 6 was implementing moves. Like I said, at this point, if you've got employees and rooms in the system, and you're assigning employees to spaces directly, and you want to allow people to request a move to move from one place to another, the move management application is already available. There's a whole process in place for requesting the move, for coordinating the move, for closing it out, and there's a console that allows you to follow your not just individual but group move requests throughout the system from start to finish. So again, we can't give you all the information about the move console and the process today, but again, this is another tool that you have to help you get people making their own requests and helping you organize your space. So lastly, for those users, if you want to turn on this portal, for those users who are going to only use the portal, it may make sense to have your system administrator go into the user table and assign them that portal navigation. So you'll notice in later account, this is not true of all Archibus versions. And I think in version 26, you're not going to do this, but after 26, like in 2022, 2023, 2024, there is a navigation method called workplace that you can assign as almost a default to all of your employees at the company who are in some general requester role. And by doing that, as soon as they link to Archibus, they won't have to go in and see this full Archibus menu. They will just see the workplace menu. So now we're ready to get into workplace. The result of a lot of this effort that you've just done is not only are you starting to prepare yourself to track the types of locations that you're actually constructing and renovating now, and to identify the utilization of that space, but the result is also that you give your employees a portal, a simplified portal like this one, where they can book their own spaces and book their own rooms. So I can see I've got workspaces turned on, I've got services turned on. I don't have reservations, but again, that's just a parameter that I missed. So let me go in and add that parameter. I go back to those application parameters. I find this is a different application. It's called AB Essential. And to turn these things on and off, it's really simple. If I want people to have a self-service book of a meeting space, I change that from a 0 to 1, I save it. Book a working space, 0 to 1, good. Create a request, leave it at 1. 1 means yes, 0 means no. Self-service move, add a 1, boom. Self-service search, catalog search, okay, everything's turned on. I go back to the workplace, refresh the screen. Now I've got access to search the system as an employee. I have access to booking a workspace, booking a meeting space, and requesting any kind of space service, moves included, that I would like the employee to use. So I can go here and just very quickly, I can now book a hotelable workstation based on what I've set up in the system. Select book, select for myself, select for a visitor, and press book. And now I'm generating utilization data for you, right? We have a capacity set up. We now have reserved the room for a day. I've now utilized that room 1 day of the week. And if I do that every day, I'm going to start building that utilization information. I'll go back to the main. We do the same thing with conference rooms. I need a conference room from 2 to 3 o'clock. I can look at different floors, see different spaces. Let's choose the main conference room. I'll book it, choose the time frame, dragging and dropping, press next, add attendees so I can send them email notifications and they can log it on their calendar, and next, and I've booked that room as well. So now I've got my desk booked for the day, and I've got a meeting room from 9:30 to 12 if I want. Okay. In addition, any kind of move requests, I can also use the move system to request a move for my employee, and I can choose the building to move that person to. So I choose a building. Let's do TGD. And a floor. And if I want to select the location, I'll pick the location, add my instructions, and send. So having followed all these steps, I'm going to go back to this slide here. I know this is very fast today, but if you follow these steps, part 1, developing your inventory, getting your buildings and floors, classifications and standards, your rooms and employees in the system, 80% of the work in getting and right sizing your space, getting your system to match what's out in the real world, that's done. Then the second part is just deciding how much information you want to allow your employees to keep updated. Do you want to allow them to manage the conference rooms by self-booking? Do you want them to manage their workspaces by self-booking? Do you want them to make their own requests for moves that go through a process in the system? If you can get, the more people you can get involved in helping you manage your space, the more accurate your utilization reporting, the more accurate your space will be for, and the more benefit you'll get out. So these are the steps you follow. We've gone very quickly through them today. I hope you understand after seeing this kind of brief overview that Archibus has a variety of tools to help you right size your space, especially if we're talking about GC workplace in the Canadian government, and that utilization of that space can now be monitored across a variety of room types, whether it's assigned space, whether it's assigned but team oriented space. If it's unassignable, it's bookable space, whether it's for meetings or conference rooms. All of these kind of functions exist in the system to help you keep things up to date. And of course, as we said at the beginning, the benefits of doing all this is actual utilization information, which informs your decisions either to shrink or grow your space. The flexibility of the system allows teams to develop their own productive working patterns, whether that means coming into the office, meeting together, working separately in quiet areas, or working from home. And obviously by implementing space processes, you're able to capture employee requests for changes that they would like and take advantage of the SLAs and the service level agreements in Archibus to send surveys, satisfaction surveys, so you can start collecting information about how well you're doing your job and how well the employees are appreciating the new services you're offering. So these are all some of the benefits of right-sizing your space with a system like Archibus. I hope this was it was informative. There was a lot of information to cover in a short amount of time. But as per usual, we're going to have another one of these sessions in 2 weeks. We're going to be talking about property management, cost tracking, and then of course cost administration and chargeback to different entities within your facilities and property portfolio. So I hope you enjoyed this. We'll stick around as usual for a couple of minutes for questions and answers. And Ian, I'll pass it off to you, and we'll try to answer whatever we can. As usual, if you have questions, please contact Ian or Kelly for any services that you may have or like.
Amazing. Thank you, Sean. Like you said, if you have any questions, you can direct it to either of us. If you want to access the recording, the email that is sent out after this has the recording link. You can feel free to circulate that with your teams. Use it as you may see. Come back to us. It would also be up on the YouTube channel. Should be on Monday or Tuesday next week. And if you're interested in any of the upcoming Horizon user groups for it, make sure to keep an eye out for those as well. I'm not seeing any questions or hands up. Like Sean said, if you have questions after reviewing the recording, come back, send them my way, and I'll make sure to answer it properly and get all the right resources over to you. We have a bunch of documents, data sheets in case you want, or other demo videos that are available. We have short ones, so like I said, just come to us for the questions. Thank you everybody for attending, and we'll see you next time.